Early this morning, congressional negotiators released a 4,000-page, $1.7 trillion spending plan to cover most of the 2023 budget. Here's what Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer had to say about the bill.
From start to finish, from top to bottom, this omnibus is bold, generous, far-reaching, and ambitious. It's not everything we would have wanted, of course. When you're dealing in a bipartisan, bicameral way, you have to sit down and get it done, and that means each side has to concede some things. But it is something that we can be very proud of, all of us.
Well, not everyone agrees with Senator Schumer's assessment. The measure has drawn harsh criticism from 13 Republican members of Congress who sent a letter to their Senate Republican colleagues criticizing the bill, coming as it does in a lame duck session of Congress. House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy echoed those sentiments, saying in a tweet that he will not support bills from any Republican senator who supports the omnibus bill, setting up a showdown between House Republicans and Senate Republicans. What's in this massive bill and how is it going to end? Joining me to discuss it all is Connor Semelsberger, Director of Federal Affairs for Life and Human Dignity at FRC. Connor, good to see you today.
Yeah, likewise. Good to see a human face instead of these 4,000 pages of the bill I've been reading all day.
Well, I believe that is true. And, we talked about this yesterday, what we thought might be in it. It was released, I think, appropriately under the cover of darkness. Tell us about what's in these 4,000 pages.
Boy, we've just hit the tip of the iceberg. And to put it simply, it's not pretty. To just hit the good things, though, there are some good things in this bill. We talk about the Hyde Amendment a lot, these pro-life riders, as we call them, that protect our taxpayer funds from subsidizing abortion or forcing people that have a moral objection to abortion to perform them. Those legacy riders are intact. So that's good news, as the Biden administration had been gunning for those since he took office. But the good news sort of ends there. There's many, many provisions here that do all sorts of host of things: extraneous funding, supporting LGBT initiatives, some grant funding that can go to Planned Parenthood. The list goes on and on. As we read this bill more and more thoroughly, diving into the 4,000 pages, it seems to be getting worse and worse as we go.
Now, Connor, I want to get into what some of these details are, because this is an omnibus bill. We talked yesterday on the program how this bill really should never be. It is 12 individual bills that, in a better world, are passed and debated and considered and amended individually, that have all been thrown into one massive bill. The deadline the legislators have given themselves is Thursday, so they've given themselves, 2.5 days to look at this and then pass a 4,000-page bill. But I want to go through some of the earmarks that we've seen just to give viewers an understanding of what is included in this, because one of the reasons why they don't want it to be scrutinized carefully is because everybody can throw their pork in there and then go back to their district and say, look what I got for you. And here's some of what has been included in this. There's $1 million for Zora's House in Ohio, which is a co-working and community space for women and gender-expansive people of color. That's pretty specific. There's $3.6 million for a Michelle Obama trail in Georgia. I don't know what her connection is to this trail in Georgia. If they name it after her, I guess it can get funded. There's $750,000 for the Trans-Latin Coalition, which is a workforce development program and supportive services for transgender and gender nonconforming and intersex immigrant women in Los Angeles. That's very specific. I don't have any idea how big that community is, because that's a very specific community. There is $2 million for the Great Blacks in Wax Museum in Baltimore. Frankly, I feel like I shouldn't be saying that, but don't shoot the messenger, because that's what it's called in the bill, right? Where does this stuff come from, Connor?
Yeah, it goes back to this thing. We all learn about it in our, 10th grade civics class, pork barrel spending. And this spending is basically members get to put a specific offer out, hey, I want the specific funds for this project back in my home district. And thankfully, Republicans back on the Tea Party movement in the 2010s really banned these earmarks. They were not a part of appropriations bills for much of the last decade. But they're back. Pelosi's House this year brought them back. The House Republicans set to take over next year have not banned them again. So they're back in play, and they're back with a vengeance. That's just a list of some of the things we found as you listed out there. And so what these things are is really lining the interest of those vested interests around the country that really aren't the American taxpayers, but those that just have the ear of their member of Congress to get them some goodie funds here at the end of the year.
Now, Connor, some of the specific programs or expenditures that I mentioned there, it's $3 million here, $2 million there. Kind of feels like budget dust when we're talking about a $1.7 trillion budget. But is there any way of knowing right now what the total spending on earmarks like this is?
Yeah, I don't think we have the full spending. I think there was a couple hundred different earmarks, tons of them. But what we did calculate up is all those earmarks related to trans initiatives or LGBT efforts. That's over $11 million. And like you said, these are so specific to a specific group. I mean, there's even $3 million in the year for Chuck Schumer in his home state of New York City to build an LGBTQ history museum. So the pale of what these things cover is quite a bit. And so, yeah, we don't know the full scope yet as we're still digging in, but it's definitely in the millions of dollars as we're digging in here.
Now, Connor, there is disagreement about how bad this particular option is with the omnibus bill. Now, Republican Senator Roy Blunt, he seems to dislike the bill, but he also seems to suggest that it's better than the alternative. Let's play clip 6.
We are doing this in the worst possible way, but the only thing worse than doing it in the worst possible way with this one big bill at the end would be not to do it and kick it to a new Congress that when the Congress starts won't even have a Ways and Means chairman or a budget chairman on the House side or lots of other things. This is no favorite of the House if we kick this to another year, and it makes it impossible to have a chance to get the bill that they are responsible for, the 2024 bill, done in the way it needs to be done.
Connor, what is Senator Blunt referring to there?
Yeah, I think it's good to point out for the viewers at home, the irony here is Senator Blunt is retiring this year. So he's heading home. So, of course, it wouldn't be good for him for this bill to get kicked into next year because he wouldn't get to have his say in how the spending goes. And that's the case for even our Senate Appropriations Chair, Richard Shelby, who's outgoing and retiring as well. But what's good to put in perspective is what we've been arguing for much of the last couple of weeks, even before the election, is that we knew this was coming down the pike. There was a momentum to push for this end-of-year spending package. And the voters, the American people, said, we want Republicans representing us in the House of Representatives. And we want those people setting the spending priorities for the House next year. And so that's why it's actually good for not just, the partisans, but all Americans. These people are elected to represent their interests. They should be working alongside, yes, a Democratic Senate and a Democrat president to set those priorities. So we've been advocating for that as a really good measure to kick it into February. And here they are. Those just wanting the last bite at the apple to get, again, maybe their pork barrel project or just their final fingerprints on a $1.7 trillion bill.
Well, there is opposition to this, and it's shaping up to be a fight between Republicans, because if the entire Republican caucus in the Senate opposed this legislation, they couldn't get it to the floor for a vote because they could not get past the filibuster in the Senate. So what's happened in the House is 13 House Republicans have sent a letter to the Senate Republicans that if you vote for this omnibus bill, we will oppose anything that you try to do in the next legislative session when the Republicans will be in control of the House. What do you think is going to happen here?
Yeah, it is quite the showdown. Like you said, Senate Republicans really control the cards. No piece of legislation can get through the U.S. Congress without bipartisan support, thanks to the filibuster. And so, the Republicans really could band together, help their friends out over in the House to set up them for a good spending opportunity and really their own interests next year. But clearly, so far, they've been wheeling and dealing with their Democratic colleagues in the Senate trying to get this done and trying to find at least 9 other friends, if you're one of these GOP senators, to come along with you and vote for this bill. But like you said, it's really not setting up for a good set next Congress when you've going to be hopefully a Republican speaker there, and then the Republicans over in the Senate there.
So is this a situation where the Senate Republicans are going to either side with the House Republicans or with the Senate Democrats?
Yeah, that's really the choice to be made. And many senators have raised that. Senator Mike Lee, Senator Rand Paul, they've been down on the floor hours and hours making this case. Hey, we as a conference don't seem united here. When unfortunately across the aisle, the Democrats always seem united. Pelosi in her House, Their Democrats have always been united. Chuck Schumer has been united, not just with his party, but even working across the aisle. And here's an area where Republicans should be united to be a defense against this reckless spending of the Biden administration. And so far, that unity just doesn't seem to be there.
It's going to be very interesting to see how this plays out over the next 48 hours. Connor, one other issue in about a minute. I understand there might be some backdoor student loan forgiveness included in this.
Yeah, so we've heard Republicans crying foul for months, right? This is a bailout for student loans, just sending back the money. Well, guess what's in this omnibus bill? $2.5 million for the Department of Education for outreach to those student borrowers that may be eligible for student loan forgiveness. So they may be saying all the rhetoric here in public that they don't want this to go through, but if they vote for this bill in the coming weeks, Senate Republicans, they're voting for the Biden administration to go forward with their student loan forgiveness program.
And Connor, last question, about 30 seconds. Any chance we see a government shutdown?
It's highly unlikely. When you get this close to a deal and Texas out, it's very likely to get through, but never say never here in Washington.
That is true. Never say never. Connor, it has been yeoman's work that you were doing, pouring through this legislation. None of us really want your job, but we're grateful you are doing it and bringing everything you're learning to us. Thanks so much for your time.
Yeah, happy to be part of this wonderful team at FRC.